She was his mother. She opened her front door and found his life erased from her home. No note, no goodbye, just an empty room and a missing blanket. Months later, he wanted back in, not into her house, but into her will. So she mailed him a certified copy. "You are not included." Then she framed his abandoned sock, not as grief, but as proof she survived him. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I came home with a prescription and found a room I didn't recognize. The garage door moaned as it shut behind Claire, muffling the outside world in one thick breath of stillness. She dropped her purse onto the hallway bench, slid off her shoes, and set the pharmacy bag on the kitchen counter. Blood pressure meds, a new vitamin for bone strength, all markers of a life that had quietly crossed into its third act. "Ryan?" she called instinctively, though the house already answered for him, with quiet. No footsteps above, no hum from the gaming console he always forgot to turn off, no empty cereal bowl on the table. She walked down the hallway, her joints protesting as she turned the brass knob to his door. The room was empty. Not messy. Not half-packed. Empty. The twin mattress had been stripped bare. Desk gone. Closet barren except for a single blue plastic hanger, spinning slightly on its rod as if someone had closed the door in a hurry. Claire blinked once, then again, slower. She stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and cardboard, not Ryan's usual mix of detergent and sleep. Her eyes scanned the corner where his guitar used to lean, the one he never played but refused to sell. Gone. Posters peeled off, the pinhole tacks still left in the wall like an unfinished sentence. She opened the closet, as if some explanation might fall out. Nothing. No note. No text. No missed call. Only the ghost of his weight in the carpet. Her hand drifted to the blanket box under the window. Empty. That blanket. She'd wrapped it carefully, the Christmas before last, pretending not to notice how little he'd brought her. A blue and gray wool knit, with his initials embroidered in the corner. He'd shrugged when he opened it. "Thanks, I guess." Now that too was gone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. Voicemail. "Hey, it's Ryan. Leave one." Beep. She said nothing, hung up, deleted the call log. For a full minute she stood still, anchoring herself by staring at the outline of dust where his dresser used to be. Then she turned sharply and walked back to the kitchen. Her bare feet slid a little on the linoleum. She opened the drawer beneath the microwave and pulled out a folder wrapped in brown twine. Her original will. She hadn't looked at it in 5 years. At the time it felt obvious. Ryan was her only child, her only heir, her only reason to have a plan at all. She carried it into the living room, sat down, and laid it on the coffee table. Her palms hovered over the edge of the envelope with his name on it. Claire looked around the house where he'd learned to read, where he'd returned after every mistake, where she'd kept the light on and the fridge full and her judgments mostly silent. She picked up the envelope and held it up to the window light. His name was still in her handwriting, neat librarian-style block letters. It used to mean something. She exhaled through her nose and opened the drawer beneath the side table, pulled out the shredder. The envelope hesitated in her hand, then slid in with a soft grind of finality. She watched each strip fall into the bin below. Then, without a word, she reached for the folder and removed a clean sheet of legal paper. A new envelope waited on the table beside her. This one had no name on it. Not yet, not anymore. She removes the will and shreds the envelope with Ryan's name on it. He packed in silence. I unpacked the memories alone. Claire moved through the house like someone walking through fog, half seeing, half remembering. She hadn't noticed before how hollow the place sounded when there was no ambient noise, no television muttering sports highlights from the living room, no refrigerator door swinging open every hour like clockwork. She stood in the hallway for a long minute, then turned back toward Ryan's room. She hadn't opened the blinds earlier. Light filtered in now, sharp and cold, casting long shadows across the bare floor. A single strip of painter's tape fluttered in the corner, the last stubborn remnant of a poster he'd tacked up during high school. She peeled it off slowly, then dropped it in the trash. It stuck to her fingers. She knelt beside the bedframe, mostly out of habit, and reached underneath, searching for nothing really. But her hand landed on something soft. A sock, worn at the heel, gray with navy stripes, crumpled like it had been kicked off during sleep. Claire sat back on her heels and stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. This was what was left. Not a goodbye, not an explanation, a sock. She didn't cry, not exactly. It was more like a collapse from the inside out, like her organs had turned to wet paper. She sat there, gripping it like it held a final word she'd missed. When she could stand again, she went to her bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand, pulled out the leather-bound journal she hadn't touched since last winter. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "Ghosted by blood," then underlined it once, hard. The next page became a list, itemized, every grocery run, every tank of gas, the winter tires, the copay for that urgent care visit last February. She included the electric bill from the summer he ran the AC at 68 degrees for 3 straight months, the takeout orders when he said he was too anxious to cook, the job interview shirt she bought him, dry cleaning, a birthday cake. As the numbers grew, her handwriting steadied. At the bottom, she wrote, "He left debt, not just in dollars." The doorbell rang mid-afternoon. Claire wiped her face with a dish towel before answering. Joan stood there, holding a ceramic casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I made enchiladas," she said. "You sounded hollow on the phone." Claire stepped aside and let her in without a word. They sat in the kitchen while the oven hummed. Claire poured tea. Neither of them touched it. Joan eventually said, "He didn't even tell you?" Claire shook her head. "He didn't need to. He told me exactly who he was, without a word." Joan reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Claire's. Her nails were perfectly shaped, as always. "You didn't deserve that," she said. "I didn't demand more either," Claire replied. "Maybe that's the same thing." They didn't talk much after that. The silence felt earned. That night, after Joan left with the promise to call tomorrow, Claire sat at her desk with the list in her journal open beside her. She turned on the desk lamp, pulled a manila envelope from the drawer. Inside was a copy of her estate summary, the one she'd printed 2 weeks ago just in case. She uncapped a black felt-tip pen and scrawled across the top, "Amendment request. Urgent." Then she sealed it, smoothed the flap down hard, and added a single return address label. The mailbox outside groaned when she opened it. The envelope dropped like a gavel. She walked back into the house with a steadiness she hadn't felt in days. She didn't look back. She mails a copy of her estate summary to her attorney marked, "Amendment request." There's no funeral for this kind of loss. Just silence. Claire sat across from Dr. Kessler in a room full of soft colors and sharp truths. The walls were pale green, chosen to calm. The therapist's voice was low but steady, the kind of tone you could mistake for gentleness until you listened to the words. "He didn't just leave," Claire said. "He evaporated." Dr. Kessler nodded, hands folded on her lap. "That's how emotional ghosts work. They don't slam doors. They erase their fingerprints." Claire swallowed hard. Her throat still felt dry from that morning. She hadn't cried again, but her face felt swollen with restraint. "Do you think I gave too much?" she asked. Dr. Kessler paused. "I think you were a resource, not a relationship. Until now." The words settled like dust on old furniture. Claire blinked at them. She didn't flinch, didn't argue. "I used to tell myself he just needed more time," Claire said. "Time to get on his feet, time to recover. But he had time. What he didn't have was—" She stopped herself. "Any intention to stay." The session ended 15 minutes later. Claire drove home with the windows up and the radio off. Silence had become its own kind of white noise, a shield and a reckoning. Back home, she went straight to the drawer where she kept her legal documents. The plastic folder was cracked at the spine, years old. She pulled it open and found the form for her power of attorney. Ryan's name sat there, printed in ink she no longer recognized as hers. She crossed it out, then typed a new copy, neat, final, emergency contact, Joan Abrams. Next came the alarm system. She changed the code to a random sequence she didn't bother to memorize, then wrote it in a small notebook she tucked into her purse. The garage opener was reset. The spare key, once hidden in the planter on the porch, was gone. She crushed it under her boot and tossed the pieces into the recycling bin. Her next stop was the hardware store. She bought a locking 2-drawer cabinet in brushed steel, hauled it into her trunk herself. A teenager offered help near the parking lot cart return. She waved him off. Back home, she unpacked it slowly, built it with the care of someone assembling a safe for secrets. When she affixed the small metal label holder on the top drawer, she paused before sliding in the tag she'd written. Legal autonomy. The second drawer she left blank. For now. By late afternoon, she stood in the doorway of Ryan's old room again. There was no sock this time, no residue of him, other than the outline where the carpet had flattened from years of furniture. She stepped inside and opened the window. The breeze carried in scents of jasmine and rain-soaked mulch. Claire exhaled. Then she opened the closet and began planning. A desk, bookshelves, a soft leather chair. She imagined blueprints in her head, quiet corners where she could think, where no one else's chaos could invade. She sat cross-legged on the floor, leaned back against the wall, and closed her eyes. She wasn't okay yet, but she was alone in a room by choice, not default. The phone buzzed beside her. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? The voice was soft, unsure. Hi. Is this Claire? Yes. This is Leah. I used to date Ryan. I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but did he leave? I haven't heard from him either. I thought maybe he was with you. Claire's heart thudded once, low and sharp. She stared at the empty wall in front of her, and something cold inside her finally turned over. Ryan's ex-girlfriend Leah calls, Did he leave? I haven't heard from him either. The last person I expected to grieve with was the woman he once ghosted too. Claire sat by the cafe window, fingers curled around a ceramic mug that had long gone cold. Outside, the wind was pushing leaves into frantic little spirals. She watched them scatter, no direction, just movement. Leah was 5 minutes late. Claire had almost turned around and left, but something told her not to. She wasn't ready to speak, but she was ready to listen. To someone who knew what it felt like to be erased by the same hand. The door chimed. A woman in her late 20s scanned the room, eyes darting until they landed on Claire. She approached cautiously, clutching a beige canvas tote that looked too big for her frame. Claire? She asked. Claire nodded and gestured to the seat across from her. Leah sat down slowly, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure if I should reach out. Claire studied her. She had kind eyes, but they were tired, worn down not by years, but by patterns. You said you haven't heard from him? Claire asked. Leah shook her head. Not a word, not since he left town. Last I knew, he was working nights at that warehouse off Jefferson. Claire didn't flinch. He left me without saying goodbye. No message. Just gone. Leah exhaled like that made her feel less crazy. Yeah, that sounds right. They were quiet for a moment. The waitress stopped by. Claire waved her off. Leah finally spoke again. He borrowed $2,000 from me. Said it was for a deposit on a new place. Then he disappeared. Phone disconnected, socials wiped. I even drove by the address he gave me. It was a vape shop. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Did he do this to you before? Leah nodded. Twice. Once after we started dating, then again after we moved in together. I always believed he'd circle back. Claire's hands were still around the mug. He's been circling his whole life, around consequences, around permanence. Leah stared down at her chipped nail polish. He changes cities when things get real. Claire's voice was steady. Roots come with responsibility. They looked at each other. Two women connected by the same absence, the same pattern. Different chapters in the same unfinished novel. For the next hour, they talked more than Claire had talked to her own son in a year. About small betrayals. Gas station receipts. Disappearing toothpaste. The slow erosion of certainty. Leah leaned back in her chair finally. You must think I'm so naive. No, Claire said, just hopeful, until hope becomes a trap. She didn't say it bitterly. It was an observation, a truth earned over time and silence. They left together. Claire held the door as Leah passed through. On the sidewalk, they paused. Neither seemed ready to say goodbye. If you ever need to talk again, Leah said, her voice trailing off. Claire offered a half smile. You already said more than he ever did. Back home, Claire went straight to her file cabinet. The lock clicked open easily now, like muscle memory. She pulled out a fresh folder, labeled it in her precise block handwriting, Those Who Showed Up. She slipped Leah's name inside, handwritten on cream paper. No title, no explanation, just her name. Then she sealed it. Claire adds Leah's name to a sealed file. Those Who Showed Up. He removed himself physically. I removed him legally. Claire sat in her attorney's office, the air-conditioned quiet broken only by the gentle scratch of a pen on paper. The smell of toner and lemon disinfectant clung to the corners. It felt more like a clinic than a place where finalities were crafted, but maybe that was fitting. This was a surgery, a clean excision. Everything's in place, her lawyer, Dana Mercer, said, flipping through the final draft of the will. Ryan Abrams receives no portion of your estate. We've assigned equal shares to the Pine Hollow Public Library Foundation, a scholarship fund in Leah Whitman's name, and Joan Abrams as executor and beneficiary. Claire nodded once. No tremble, no second look. Dana studied her. You know he may contest this later, especially once money is involved. Claire folded her hands in her lap. Let him. I've kept every receipt of absence. Dana blinked at that, said nothing. Claire signed the final page. Her name curved across the bottom with the steady hand of a woman who'd spent decades cataloging fiction and had finally rewritten her own. When she got home, she pulled the old family photos from the bookshelf, frames layered in dust. Most hadn't been touched since before Ryan moved back in, smiling third-grade school portraits. A camping trip Claire barely remembered enjoying. Photos from her parents' anniversary, Ryan wedged awkwardly between relatives he hadn't spoken to since. She slid them all into a plastic bin and labeled it, History, Not Hope. She placed the bin in the back of the hall closet behind the guest linens, out of sight, not out of mind, but no longer a shrine. That weekend she bought soil, ceramic pots, seedlings, lavender, sage, rosemary, yellow bells, simple, hardy things. She cleared a patch along the west side of the yard and dug into the dirt with her bare hands. Each plant had a name, Joan, Leah, her late friend Margie from her teaching days, her sister Ruth, who still called every Christmas even though they hadn't lived in the same state since the 80s. Every name was someone who'd stayed, or at least said goodbye like they meant it. She left one square of earth untouched, not empty, just unclaimed. A single wooden stake marked it. No inscription, just blank space. She didn't plant anything there. She didn't need to. By Monday morning, the soil still hadn't been disturbed. No weeds, no roots reaching across the line, just a quiet perimeter around a choice she had already made. She brewed tea, watered the new garden, and took a photo from her porch. Then she walked inside, opened the legal autonomy cabinet, and tucked the photo next to the folder marked Those Who Showed Up. There was room for one more. She was closing the drawer when the mail slot clinked. A single envelope slid across the hardwood floor. No return name, just an address, Denver, Colorado. Claire stood still, long enough for the wind outside to shift and settle, long enough for the memory of his voice to float through her head, just for a second, then vanish again. She didn't open it. Not yet. She picked it up like it was breakable and walked it into the room she no longer called his. A letter arrives from Ryan, postmarked from Denver. He wrote 5 sentences. None of them said sorry. The envelope sat untouched on the edge of Claire's desk for 2 days, a paperweight of tension she refused to acknowledge. She couldn't decide if leaving it unopened made her strong or just cowardly. Every time she walked by, it felt like it pulsed, faintly, like a heart behind drywall. The Denver return address gave away just enough to be real, but not enough to be personal. No sender's name, no handwriting, just machine-printed anonymity from someone who'd mastered the art of emotional evasion. On the third morning, just after her second cup of coffee had cooled beyond warmth, Claire reached for the envelope with the same care she'd once used to hold Ryan's feverish forehead. She slid it open with the thin silver letter opener she kept tucked beside her journal, a small, elegant tool that had opened countless thank you notes and sympathy cards over the years, never something like this. Inside was a single sheet of white paper. No return phone number, no date. The formatting was so sterile it could have passed for a form letter. The words were typed in a standard black serif font, nothing handwritten, nothing human. Claire, I needed space. Hope you're doing okay. I might reach out again when things feel more stable. Take care. Ryan. She stared at the words. Her eyes scanned the page once, then again, not because she'd missed anything, but because she couldn't quite believe how little was there. 5 sentences. None of them said sorry. None acknowledged the way he left. None referenced the years she had carried him, protected him, bent her life into shapes so he wouldn't shatter his. There was no heat in her reaction, no heartbreak, just stillness. The kind that settles in bones when grief has already passed through and what's left behind is simply dust. She stood slowly, walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room, and fed the letter in with both hands. The blades whirred softly, slicing the sheet into strips like they were trimming dead ends from something long severed. She did not watch it all the way through. It wasn't anger. She just didn't need to. But she kept the envelope. She flattened it with her palm, smoothed the corner against the edge of the desk, and slid it into her locked cabinet beneath the tab marked Correspondence, Legal. That afternoon, she met Joan on the back patio for tea. The garden had started to take to the soil, sprigs of rosemary already firming their stems and lavender turning purple around the edges. The scent in the air was light, earthy, and honest. Joan glanced at her over the rim of her mug. You read it? Claire nodded. 5 sentences, not a trace of regret. Joan exhaled slowly, the steam from her tea briefly fogging her glasses. Closure doesn't come from them. It comes from decisions. I know, Claire said, and I've made mine. That night, after dinner and dishes and the soft ache in her knees reminded her it was time to sit down, Claire opened her notebook and wrote out a list. Neat, legible, like she was shelving books again. Update burial instructions, reassign executor, donate Ryan's childhood books to the school library, cancel joint memberships, remove him from Medicare emergency contact. She didn't rush through it. Each line was a choice. Each checkmark would be earned. The next morning, she boxed up 3 dozen books from Ryan's childhood room, books she used to read aloud, books he once begged her to reread, books he stopped touching once he discovered the internet and temporary escapes. She packed them gently, wrapping the corners with tissue paper as if she were handling glass. Before sealing the box, she slipped in a note addressed to the school librarian. May these stories find new readers. They were once loved, and that matters. By midday, she had submitted executor paperwork to her lawyer, formally listing Joan's name in Ryan's place. It felt less like punishment and more like accuracy. She was updating her online retirement forms when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. Hello? Mrs. Abrams? A man asked, his voice professional but brisk. My name's Darren Colt. I'm a representative with First Ridge Bank. I'm calling regarding a dormant joint savings account opened in 2016, under your and Orion Abrams's name. Claire sat straighter. Yes, I remember that account. What about it? Mr. Colt hesitated briefly, then continued. This morning, Mr. Abrams initiated a request to access and transfer funds from the account. Bank policy requires us to notify both parties before any reactivation, given the account's joint status. Claire's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table. Of all the ties she thought she had severed, this one had slipped through, still tethered, still open. I see, she said, voice flat. Thank you for letting me know. After she hung up, Claire opened her notebook again. She turned to a new page and wrote at the top, Loose ends. A lawyer calls. Ryan's trying to access a dormant joint savings account Claire forgot to close. He moved out quietly, tried to cash in loudly. By the time Claire pulled into the parking lot at First Ridge Bank, the morning sun had climbed high enough to cast sharp reflections across the windshields. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, gathering her breath. The bank building was modest. Brick facade, clean windows, an American flag fluttering on a pole near the sidewalk. But today it felt like a courtroom, or a battlefield. Inside, the chill of central air wrapped around her shoulders. A young teller greeted her with a practiced smile, but Claire didn't waste time. "I need to speak with someone about a joint account," she said, her voice composed but clipped. "It's urgent." A few minutes later, she sat across from a financial officer in a small, glass-walled office. Her folder was open in front of her, documents she had pulled from her safe that morning, all in chronological order. She had labeled each section in her own handwriting, opened 2016, never used after 2019, dormant since. The woman reviewing the paperwork, early 30s, wedding ring, tired eyes, flipped to the most recent statement and looked up. "You're lucky you caught it," she said gently. "If you hadn't responded, the system would have defaulted to active status by tomorrow. With both parties still listed, he could have withdrawn everything." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity and silence. She didn't ask how much money was in the account. She already knew. It wasn't much, under $5,000, but that wasn't the point. This was about access, about assumption. "I'd like to remove his name today," Claire said, "and close the account permanently." The woman nodded. "We'll need to verify some signatures and run a security clearance. I'll walk you through it." The process took nearly an hour. Claire followed each step without hesitation, initialing lines, signing her full name, flipping pages without pause. She had been through harder things. A bank form was not going to rattle her. When it was done, the woman slid a small folder across the table. It was cream-colored with the bank's logo embossed on the front. Claire took out her pen and, in the space marked name or purpose, wrote 4 words in her steady librarian hand: "Independent to the end." Back in her car, Claire rested the folder on the passenger seat and stared out through the windshield. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. What she felt was a strange, quiet clarity, like a pane of glass had finally been wiped clean. That afternoon, she made 2 more calls, one to her financial planner, one to her long-term care provider. She had never paid much attention to the future in the abstract, but today it felt urgent. Not because of fear, but because she no longer trusted anyone else to make the decisions she should have made long ago. She transferred part of her savings into a pre-funded care policy. No more dependency, no more hoping someone would step in when the time came. She had been a safety net for years. Now she was building one for herself. When she returned home, she placed the bank folder in her cabinet beneath the label she'd drawn the week before. Legal autonomy. The drawer closed with a satisfying click. She spent the rest of the evening in the garden, pruning the rosemary and cutting back the sage. The spot she had left bare, Ryan's space, remained untouched. She knelt near it briefly, not to plant anything, just to acknowledge that it was still there, still empty. As the sun dipped behind the trees, her phone buzzed on the patio table beside her. She glanced at the screen. A text. From Leah? He reached out. Said, "Tell her I was just trying to survive?" Claire stared at the message, her fingers still stained with soil. She didn't respond, but something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, just a quiet widening of the space between explanation and repair. Ryan messages through Leah. "Tell her I was just trying to survive." He used survival as a shield. I used survival as fuel. The next time Claire saw Leah, they met at the same cafe with the chipped mugs and quiet corner tables. It was late afternoon, just before the dinner rush, and the place was nearly empty. Outside, the trees along Main Street were just beginning to turn, rusted orange leaves curling at their tips. Fall had always been Claire's favorite season, something about the way things ended honestly. Leah looked tired, but sharper somehow. Her eyes met Claire's with a steadiness that wasn't there the first time. Maybe it was the relief of being heard. Maybe it was the slow unwinding of someone else's hold on her. Claire didn't bother with small talk. "I got your message," she said, setting her bag down. The one from him? Leah nodded. I didn't want to hold it. Figured it was yours to do something with or not. Claire reached for her tea, let the steam hit her face before answering. He said he was trying to survive. The sentence hung between them for a moment. Heavy, fragile, already familiar. I understand, Claire said at last. I just don't excuse it anymore. Leah's lips parted as if she might say something, but she didn't. She just nodded again. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the espresso machine and the distant clatter of dishes the only backdrop. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her journal. She flipped to a page near the middle, where a rough entry had once been scribbled in haste, ghosted by blood. She turned to the next blank page and wrote something slower, more deliberate. I mothered. He disappeared. That's not a bond. It's a blueprint. She didn't explain it to Leah. She didn't have to. You know, Leah said eventually, it wasn't just with you. When he lost his last job, he told me he was going to figure things out. Then he disappeared for a week, wouldn't answer texts. When he finally came back, he acted like nothing happened. No explanation, just wanted to pick up where we left off. Claire closed her journal and placed it gently on the table. He doesn't know how to stay, she said. Leah looked down at her hands. I think he doesn't know how to be seen when he's not winning. The observation landed with eerie accuracy. Claire let it settle. I've spent so many years protecting him from the truth, she said quietly. I wanted to believe that shielding him from pain would make him stronger. It didn't. It just made him better at running. They finished their tea slowly. When the check came, Claire reached for it. Leah protested with a soft laugh, but Claire shook her head. Come with me tomorrow, Claire said as they stood near the door. There's a youth mentorship group I've started volunteering with, middle schoolers mostly. Some of them don't have mothers. Some of them have mothers who are just exhausted. Leah raised an eyebrow. You think I'd be helpful? I think, Claire replied, you've survived something. And there are kids who need to see what that looks like up close. Leah didn't say yes right away, but she smiled. A real one this time. It reached the corners of her eyes. I'll come, she said. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll come. The next morning, they met in the community center parking lot. Claire brought extra notebooks and granola bars in her bag. Leah brought nothing but herself, and that was enough. They sat in a circle with 7 kids, none older than 13, all shifting in their seats, eyes darting, guarded but curious. By the end of the hour, Leah was talking to a girl named Kiara about what to do when your best friend suddenly stops speaking to you. Claire watched from across the room and felt something shift. Not about Ryan, but about herself. That night, Claire returned home to find another message waiting. Not from Leah. From him. An audio file. 17 seconds long. She stood in the kitchen for a full minute before pressing play. Ryan's voice, familiar and distant, crackled through the speaker. Mom, it's me. I know I screwed things up. I want to talk. I want back in. The message ended as abruptly as he had left. Claire didn't move. She didn't cry, but she listened to it once more before turning off her phone. Ryan sends a voice message. I want back in. He wanted back into a story he left mid-sentence. The message sat in her phone like a live wire. Claire had listened to it twice the night it arrived, once in shock, and once just to be sure it was real. She hadn't touched it since. Every time she glanced at her phone, she felt its weight, the 17 seconds pressing into her chest like a palm flat against her sternum. I want back in. Back into what? Exactly? For 2 days, she didn't respond. She cooked. She watered the garden. She watched Leah lead a mentorship activity with surprising ease, her once fidgety presence now grounded as she helped a boy name all 50 states from memory. Claire smiled at that, quietly proud. She called Joan just to check in, and they spent a full hour talking about nothing at all, which somehow made her feel more tethered than any apology Ryan could ever offer. But even as the days passed, the message lived in the background. Like a draft through a window she thought she'd sealed shut. On the second night, Claire poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the old armchair by the window, phone in hand. She played the message once more, the words now familiar. Mom, it's me. I know I screwed things up. I want to talk. I want back in." There was something desperate at the end, the way his breath caught slightly. A small stammer, but there was no apology, no ownership, just the ache of someone wanting comfort without confronting cost. She closed her eyes and imagined him, how he might look now, unshaven, maybe thinner, maybe not. She thought about the boy she'd raised, the man he'd become, the gap between the two that had become a canyon. Claire opened the legal autonomy drawer and retrieved a copy of her revised will, the same version she'd finalized months ago, notarized and backed by layers of documentation. She pulled out a yellow highlighter and ran a slow, deliberate stroke across the section labeled Beneficiaries. Ryan's name was not there. On a separate sheet of notepaper, she wrote by hand, slowly and clearly, "Absence has consequences." She didn't sign it with love. She didn't sign it at all. The next morning, she drove to the post office and requested a certified mailer. She watched as the clerk affixed the barcode sticker, checked the address she'd scribbled on the envelope, Ryan's Denver P.O. box, and sealed it with practiced finality. "No return envelope?" the clerk asked. "No," Claire said, her voice calm. "There won't be a response." She walked back to her car without looking over her shoulder. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel cruel. What she felt was a slow exhale, like letting go of something she'd been gripping too tightly for too long. That evening, she moved through the house with the ease of someone reclaiming their own corners. She lit a candle in the kitchen, the kind she used to save for company, and allowed its scent, fir and cedar, to fill the space. She sat on the couch with her feet tucked under her and started reading a novel she'd been meaning to get to for months. For once, the silence in the house felt earned, not empty. As she turned a page, the doorbell rang. Claire set her book down carefully and opened the front door to find no one there, just an envelope resting on the welcome mat. It was hand-delivered, not mailed, no stamp, no seal. She picked it up slowly. The handwriting was unfamiliar, feminine, slanted, neat. Inside was a short letter from Ryan's girlfriend. Claire read it standing in the doorway, her other hand still clutching the knob. "Claire, I don't mean to intrude. I just thought you should know. He's not doing well. He's spiraling. Talking in circles, not sleeping. I don't think he understands what's happening to him, or maybe he does, and that's what's scaring him. He keeps bringing up your name." Claire stood still as the porch light flickered on overhead. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing leaves across the step like a whisper. She folded the letter once and brought it inside. A letter arrives from Ryan's girlfriend. He's spiraling. "I've answered that alarm before. This time I let it ring." Claire read the letter again in the morning light, the words slightly blurred by the uneven folds. The handwriting was delicate, but not afraid. She could hear the girl's voice between the lines, strained, unsure whether she was warning Claire or asking her to save him. "He's not doing well. He's spiraling. He keeps bringing up your name." Claire closed the note and placed it beside the sugar jar on the kitchen table. She didn't touch her coffee, she just stared out the window, the sun hitting the garden in long, filtered slants. The rosemary was overgrown again. She'd trim it later. By mid-morning, she sat at her desk with a blank card in front of her. No stationery, just a plain white note card. She wrote slowly, carefully, and left no room for misinterpretation. "I'm sorry to hear he's struggling. I hope he gets the help he needs. But I am not a rehab center. Claire." She placed it in an envelope, addressed it with firm handwriting, and walked it to the mailbox. The metal flap clanged shut behind her. She didn't feel cruel. She felt clear. Still, that night, she folded the original letter into a sleeve of her journal and took it with her to therapy. She passed it across to Dr. Kessler, who read it in silence, her lips pressed in a straight, unreadable line. Claire sat upright, her coat still draped over her lap like a shield. "Is it cruel?" she asked. "What I wrote?" Dr. Kessler didn't answer immediately. She held the note between two fingers, the way someone might hold a sparrow that had flown into the wrong room. "No," she said at last. "It's boundary. It only feels cruel because it's new." Claire exhaled slowly, as if she'd been waiting for permission to believe that. That weekend, Claire visited the local family advocacy nonprofit Leah had mentioned weeks ago. She didn't call ahead. She just walked in, asked if they needed volunteers, and filled out the paperwork at a folding table in the hallway. The building was old, scuffed linoleum floors, faded bulletin boards, but the energy inside felt intact, like the roots of something stronger than any one person's grief. They placed her in administrative outreach, letters, donor thank you cards, newsletters, familiar work. Her hands moved with practiced calm, and her words had never sounded more deliberate. On her second week, the program director, a woman in her 40s with cropped hair and a quiet smile, asked if Claire might be willing to share her story for their community blog. Something honest, something quiet, nothing dramatic, just a window into why she chose to show up. Claire said she'd think about it. 2 days later, she submitted the first draft by email. The title she gave it was, "Inheritance Doesn't Equal Forgiveness." It was only 500 words, no names, no anger, just a record of facts wrapped in reflection. She wrote about how easy it was to forget yourself when you're someone else's safety net, about how surviving someone's absence is harder when they're still alive, and about how sometimes survival requires subtraction. The post went live the following Monday, quietly, no fanfare, but 3 days later, the nonprofit forwarded her an email from a podcast host in Vermont. Subject: "Would you be willing to speak?" The message was simple. "Dear Claire, I read your essay. It stopped me cold. I run a small podcast for women over 60, mostly focused on emotional estrangement, invisible grief, and rebuilding identity later in life. Your voice is exactly what we try to center. Would you be open to recording an episode with us? We can keep it anonymous if you'd prefer. Either way, I'm grateful you wrote it." Marla Claire sat with the email open on her screen, the cursor blinking as if waiting for her next move. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't delete it either. Claire is asked to speak on a podcast for women over 60 who've been emotionally ghosted. "I didn't raise a ghost, but I'm done chasing one." Claire sat at her dining table, the microphone perched like a tiny lighthouse beside her laptop, blinking blue and still. The host's voice had faded seconds ago, leaving only soft ambient music in her earbuds and the steady prompt, "Claire, whenever you're ready." She took a breath. Not deep, just enough to speak without shaking. But even that proved ambitious. "My name isn't really Claire," she began, voice trembling just enough to make her pause. "But what I'm telling you is real." She glanced at her notes, then pushed them aside. What she needed to say wasn't on paper. "I raised a son who grew up and somewhere along the way stopped knowing me, or maybe he never really did. I kept the fridge full, I paid his bills, I made sure the thermostat stayed warm when he was unemployed and cold when he was anxious. And one day, he left. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence." Her voice steadied the longer she spoke, like the words were bricks laid across a bridge she hadn't dared walk until now. "I used to think grief was for the dead," she said. "But grieving the living, that's a different kind of erosion. You lose yourself in echoes, in empty rooms, in the sound of your own generosity coming back unanswered." She wasn't sure how long she talked. The host, Marla, only spoke once, quietly to say she was still listening. That was enough. Claire ended the episode with a sentence she hadn't rehearsed. "I didn't raise a ghost, but I've finally stopped chasing one." She clicked "End Recording" and closed the lid of her laptop slowly, as if the motion sealed something inside. Outside, the wind rattled a few early winter leaves across the porch, brittle and soft at the same time. She didn't mention the podcast to anyone, not Joan, not Leah, not even her therapist. It felt too raw, too vulnerable, like holding a pulse in her palm. But 3 weeks later, the nonprofit forwarded her a folder. Inside were 63 letters, some typed, many handwritten in looping cursive. They came from places she'd never been: Iowa, South Carolina, a veterans village in Arizona. Each one thanked her for naming something they'd lived but never spoken aloud. One said, "You made me feel sane again." Another, "I finally changed my will." She read them all at the kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold and a pen in her hand to underline the lines that struck hardest. When she finished, she didn't cry. She felt, Anchored. That weekend, Claire moved 2 armchairs and a side table into the sunroom. She laid out a white throw rug, added a candle, and taped a note to the inside of the front door. Tuesdays 6 to 8. Bring what you carry. It started with 3 women, then 5. Joan came. Leah joined. Someone brought banana bread. Someone else crocheted tissue box covers. One woman had never spoken aloud about her daughter's abandonment until that night. Another said she hadn't spoken at all to anyone for weeks. Claire called it Ghost Circle, though never out loud. But the name lived in her notes, her grocery list, her planner, in every pot of tea she steeped, in every folding chair she unfolded with care. On the wall of the sunroom she framed a single photo. It was one of her and Leah taken in the garden, unposed, slightly blurry. They were both laughing. It was the only photo on display. No sun, no shadow, just presence. One afternoon, after the last guest had left and the candle had been blown out, Claire found a new envelope on the front step, plain white, addressed in handwriting she didn't immediately recognize, but her fingers knew. Her breath slowed. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, just 1 page. Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I know I can't undo what I did. I don't know if this even helps. I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry for all of it. Ryan Claire didn't move for a long time. Outside, the rosemary had grown wild again. Ryan sends one final letter. I'm sorry, I was wrong. He said the words, but not when I needed them. Claire reread the letter once, then once more, slower the second time. Her hands didn't shake. She folded it along its original crease and set it gently on the table, as if it were a photo of someone who used to mean more than they do now. There was no bitterness in her chest, just the dull ache of recognition. The words were sincere. That much she could tell. The apology wasn't defensive. It didn't barter for pity, but it arrived like an ambulance to an empty house. Flashing lights, no one left to save. She sat for a while, not thinking, not analyzing, just being. Listening to the small sounds of the kitchen, the quiet buzz of the refrigerator, the faint rattle of a wind chime near the back door, the rhythms of a life she had built deliberately, a life he had no part in. She walked to her desk, opened her stationery drawer, and pulled out a cream envelope. She wrote a single page, the same way she'd written donor acknowledgments and condolence notes and formal thank you cards for decades, measured, graceful, and firm. Ryan, I've forgiven you, but I've also chosen peace that doesn't include you. Claire. She sealed it without rereading. No return address. Before placing it in the outgoing mail, she snapped a photo of the envelope on her kitchen counter and texted it to Leah. If he tries again, you'll know what I've chosen. Leah responded within minutes. Understood and respected. Claire didn't block his number immediately. She waited until she'd cleaned the dishes, until she'd watered the mint on the windowsill, until she'd fed the neighbor's cat that had taken to curling on her porch every morning. Then she opened her phone, pulled up the contact, and tapped block caller with a calm, final breath. It didn't feel cruel. It felt like closing a book you'd already read, even if the last chapter showed up years later, pleading to be rewritten. That afternoon, she retrieved the most recent version of her will from the file cabinet. There was nothing to change, no additions, no retractions, just a single quiet act. She took a blue pen, underlined the words, finalized, irrevocable, and wrote the date in the corner. That night, she booked a weekend cabin in the mountains, a small A-frame tucked along a ridge near Asheville. No Wi-Fi, no television, just a fireplace, a trailhead, and a tiny kitchen stocked with strong coffee and a basket of wool blankets. She didn't tell Joan, she didn't tell Leah, she didn't leave a note. She packed light, her journal, a novel, a sweater she'd knitted the previous fall, a printout of the 63 letters from listeners, folded neatly in a folder marked Ghost Circle, Origins. The drive up the Blue Ridge Parkway was quiet, winding. Trees thinned the higher she climbed, and the air shifted, cleaner, edged with pine and cold. At the cabin, she unpacked in silence, made tea, and sat on the front steps, letting the wind kiss her hairline and pull at her sleeves. She wasn't lonely. She wasn't waiting. The second morning, she rose early and hiked one of the nearby trails. It wasn't difficult, but her knees reminded her she wasn't 30 anymore. The trees flanked the path like sentinels, bare-limbed but not lifeless. She walked until the sound of her own footsteps became a rhythm, until her breath aligned with the silence around her. At the trail's overlook, she paused, hands in her pockets, staring out at the haze layering the ridges in soft, smoky folds. She felt like she could see every version of herself below, each one folded into the others like quilts on a cedar chest. When she turned to head back, a woman stood near the fork in the trail, adjusting her scarf. Middle-aged, warm face, kind eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Sorry to bother you, but—" She hesitated. Are you the Claire from that podcast?" Claire froze, not startled exactly, just suddenly visible in a way she hadn't expected. "I recognized your voice," the woman added. "I listened to your episode twice. I played it for my sister." Claire's hands stayed in her pockets. She didn't answer right away, but she smiled. A woman at the retreat recognizes her from the podcast. "I thought I told my story in silence, but others heard it loud." The woman on the trail introduced herself as Evelyn. She was a retired nurse from Maryland in Asheville for a grief and resilience weekend her daughter had gifted her for Christmas. "I didn't expect to recognize anyone," she said, smiling. "Certainly not a voice from my headphones." Claire didn't know what to say at first. She hadn't prepared for this, the feeling of being seen not as a mother, not as a volunteer, not even as someone grieving, but as a voice, a story. They walked the rest of the trail together, their boots crunching the frost-tipped leaves as the wind slipped through the canopy like breath through teeth. Evelyn didn't ask for more. She simply said, "Your episode helped me disinherit my brother. He hurt me most of my life. I thought I had to stay polite. I thought forgiveness was the same as healing." Claire glanced sideways. "It's not," Evelyn added, soft but certain. "It's just quiet surrender. Your words made me choose something louder." Claire didn't reply, not with words. But when they reached the bottom of the trail, she placed a hand briefly on Evelyn's shoulder. A gesture without ceremony, just recognition. 2 weeks after returning home, Claire received an email from a publishing imprint she'd never heard of. Small, independent, mostly memoirs and social essays. The subject line read, "Ghost Circle." In print? They'd found her podcast, then her essay. Someone on their editorial board had been one of the anonymous Tuesday night listeners. The letter was kind, not flashy. There was no rush, no contract attached, just an invitation. Would you be willing to curate a collection of personal essays, your story, and those of other women who've experienced familial estrangement, silent abandonments, or legacy reclaims? Working title, Ghosted, Stories of Estranged Women Reclaiming Legacy. Claire read the message 3 times. She didn't say yes immediately. She walked to the garden. She trimmed the lavender. She called Joan, not to ask for advice, but to say, "Something's happening." And when she finally replied to the email, her response was simple. "Yes. Let's tell the truth out loud." The next few months passed in a rhythm she hadn't known she was hungry for. She wrote in the mornings, answered follow-up questions from contributors at night. Women she had met only through folded pages and quiet nods were now sending her paragraphs about their mothers, their sons, their sisters, the nights they cried in closets or drove 6 hours just to scream into an empty ocean. She read every story. Some made her ache, some made her laugh. One made her get up from her desk and light a candle without knowing why. The manuscript came together slowly but surely, each voice layered into the next like patchwork made of wounds that had finally stopped bleeding. She wrote the opening line of her foreword last. Sometimes survival means subtraction. Ryan's name appeared nowhere in the book. He no longer lived in her documents, her emergency contacts, or the lines she rehearsed when someone asked if she had children. He wasn't erased. He was just closed. The final draft was submitted in late spring. The publisher responded with warmth and enthusiasm, noting they'd aim for an early winter release. Claire printed the acceptance email and slid it into the legal autonomy drawer, not for legal reasons, just to remind herself how many things could be built after silence. When the royalty check arrived a month later, it was smaller than she expected, but heavier than she imagined. She opened the envelope with the same letter opener she'd once used on his last apology. The check was modest, but it was earned. Claire walked to the filing cabinet, opened the folder titled Independent to the End, and tucked the check behind the final page of her will. Then she closed the drawer and poured herself a glass of wine. Claire receives her first royalty check. It started as his bedroom. It became my legacy room. The first thing Claire did was open the blinds. The light streamed into the old room with a sharpness she hadn't expected, catching every faint impression left behind, where the posters once hung, where the desk legs had worn divots in the carpet. She stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand still on the knob, and just looked, not at what was gone, but at what was possible. She started with the walls, painted them a soft eucalyptus green. Something cool, calm, and adult. The old mattress had long since been donated, so she measured for shelving instead. A custom-built unit would have been nice, but instead she found a sturdy second-hand bookcase on Facebook Marketplace, its wood slightly scuffed, its history unknown. She liked that. She added plants, snake plant, English ivy, a single pothos that spilled over its ceramic edge like it had been waiting for somewhere to stretch. In the far corner, she set up a small microphone on a padded stand. Nothing fancy, but good enough to record new podcast episodes from the room that once held everything she couldn't say. She didn't remove the framed sock. Instead, she centered it on the wall above the bookshelf, pressed between glass, resting on white linen, labeled in her own handwriting. January, found, June, freed. It wasn't grief. It was a trophy. That fall, the book released under the title Ghosted, Stories of Estranged Women Reclaiming Legacy, modest print run, modest press. But somehow it found its way into elder care newsletters and community bulletin boards and social media circles filled with long posts and longer silences. By November, it appeared on 2 indie bestseller lists focused on senior nonfiction. Claire didn't tell anyone right away. She just noticed the orders coming in faster. The emails from strangers. One woman wrote, "You saved me from giving everything to someone who gave me nothing." Another said, "I didn't know we were allowed to write people out until I read what you wrote in." In response, Claire launched a Zoom group called Legacy, Not Loyalty. Free, once a month, limited to 12 seats. She capped it there because any more and the space stopped feeling sacred. She wasn't trying to become someone's guru. She was just offering a place. A mirror. Leah joined the first one, Joan the second. Others followed. The room, once a void, became a vessel. She mailed Leah a signed copy of the book with a note tucked inside the front cover, "For the girl who stayed present." Leah texted a photo of it sitting beside her coffee cup, captioned, "You are seen." One evening, after a particularly resonant Zoom call where a woman named Beatrice had shared that she'd rewritten her will after 30 years, Claire recorded her first short video for social media. She sat in the reclaimed room, the podcast mic just out of frame, the bookshelf and potted ivy behind her. She spoke plainly, clearly, no edits, no filters. "Leaving doesn't just hurt the heart," she said. "It rearranges the will." She posted it without hashtags. Within 2 days, it had over 12,000 views. The comments flooded in, paragraphs, not emojis. She let them sit, let them grow roots. One afternoon, after an early walk and a second cup of coffee, Claire opened her inbox and found an email with the subject line, "Training request, legal story use?" It was from an attorney based in Minneapolis, working with a nonprofit group focused on elder financial protection. They'd read her book, listened to her podcast, watched the clip. "We're developing new training modules for social workers and elder care professionals," the message read. "Your story is a case study in boundary and consequence. Would you be open to us using it as part of our program?" Claire read the message 3 times, then again out loud. She didn't reply right away, but she felt something rise inside her. Not pride, not closure, just clarity. An attorney contacts her, asking to use her story in elder financial protection training. He walked out the door without warning. I walked into peace with a plan. The training session was held in a small auditorium inside the Hennepin Community Center, a red brick building with a mural of wildflowers on its side and a parking lot that flooded easily when it rained. Claire arrived early. She always arrived early. She wore charcoal gray slacks and a soft navy blouse. Nothing loud, nothing performative, just practical, clean lines. On the table in front of her sat a thin folder containing the presentation slides she'd approved weeks ago. Her story was labeled not as testimony, but as Case Study, Autonomy and Aftermath. When her name was called, she stood and stepped toward the podium with unhurried precision. The room was filled mostly with social workers, elder advocates, a few probate attorneys. Many had pen and paper in front of them, a few had their arms crossed. Claire wasn't there to entertain them. She was there to teach. She cleared her throat, then spoke. "I'm Claire. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial planner. But I am someone who learned too late that keeping your name on a checkbook is not the same thing as keeping your child in your life." The silence in the room shifted. Not awkward, just listening. "I'm here to say, don't just die with a will, live with one." Later, after the session had ended and a few people lingered to shake her hand or thank her quietly in the hallway, Claire stepped outside and let the cool air meet her skin. It had rained while she was inside. The pavement was still wet, reflecting a dull watercolor sky. She didn't go home right away. Instead, she drove past her old school, then past the strip mall where she used to meet Joan for early dinners after bad weeks. It was a kind of silent circuit, passing markers of who she had been, not with longing, but with familiarity. Like revisiting a town she no longer lived in, but still knew by heart. That evening, she walked through her garden with a pair of gloves tucked into her waistband and a flat stone cradled in both hands. The stone was smooth, about the size of a paperback novel, pale gray, etched by hand, lesson learned. She knelt by the square of earth she had always left bare. Ryan's space, unplanted, untouched, not out of mourning, not anymore, but out of principle, out of respect for the boundary she had once never dared to enforce. With quiet care, she pressed the stone into the soil. No flowers, no name, just truth. Back inside, she opened the cabinet labeled Legal Autonomy one last time that week. Inside were the same folders she had organized over the course of her reclaiming: the revised will, the podcast transcripts, the royalty check, the training program packet, each one a page from a book that had never been about revenge, only return. She closed the drawer, slow and certain. The lock clicked softly. She poured a glass of wine, Cabernet, a gift from Leah for her birthday, and brought it to the desk in her legacy room. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and printer ink. She opened her journal to a clean page. The same journal that once read "Ghosted by Blood" now cradled blank lines waiting for new chapters. She didn't start with a date. She started with a sentence, then another, and another. She no longer needed an ending. She only needed to begin. Outside, dusk folded itself over the house, as gentle as memory. Inside, Claire wrote beneath a framed sock in a shelf of her own making. And when she paused to sip her wine, she let her eyes rest on the words she'd just written. He left with nothing. I left him nothing. But I kept everything that mattered. He left with nothing. I left him nothing. But I kept everything that mattered.